Hello and welcome, I'm Master Denes Boros, and this is the second game from the World Championship, a match between the challenger Nepo and the reigning champion Magnus Carlsen. So instead of going for e4, he goes for d4, which isn't as surprising as it may seem, but let's delve deep. So d4, knight f6, c4, e6, d5, g3, bishop e7, the Catalan, where Nepo goes for this bishop e7 line, which has been championed by Karpov himself, a big champion of his time in the 70s and 80s and a bit of 90s, and later on was a favorite and is still a favorite of Sergei Karyakin, who is incidentally in Team Nepo. A surprise? Not. Bishop g2, castles, takes, queen c2, b5, and this is somewhat of a surprise. You usually see a6, a4, bishop d7 takes, bishop c6, and so on. White actually is a little bit better, but black gets rid of its only bad piece, that bishop that used to be on c8. So Nepo plays b5, and hopes to catch Carlsen off guard, but it's actually the contrary because Magnus plays the inspired knight e5 move. Now, if you check the database, knight e5 is rarely, if ever, played on top level, so Nepo was not suspecting this and caught somewhat off guard. Having to face this, he was facing the uphill task of challenging Carlsen's preparation. You may be wondering, where is this knight e5 from? Now, knight e5 is not the top choice of the engine. We have to give credit where credit is due. Daniil Dubov, who is a team member of Carlsen's group, is actually coming up ideas and creative ideas at that, left and right, and knight e5 feels like one of those. The whole point is, yes, you defended the pawn, but your a8 rook is a little bit loose. c6, a4, still trying to undermine this structure. Knight d5, knight c3. In fact, interestingly enough, you could consider b3, try to undermine the c and b pawns, and due to the fact that black's pieces are still in the garage, you have ample play as white for the sacrificed pawn. Knight c3 was played instead, f6, knight f3, queen d7, and interestingly enough, b4 would transpose into a different game between Galfond and Shirov, Imopar, Paris, where Shirov actually got destroyed in a beautiful game. So maybe recalling that or inspired Nepo avoids it and plays queen d7, which is a legitimate move, trying to keep the tension going, and of course if captures, c takes, and with a better structure like that and a fianchetto, black would even be better. But of course, Carlsen wants to go and get counterplay in the center. Yes, he is down a pawn, but he's got two pawns in the middle and some chances to blow it all open. Knight b4, queen e2. Some other idea would be going queen b1 and go for b3, but Carlsen is playing more central chess. Knight d3, e5. And e5 is a very strong move, cutting the board half, which is super important as most of his pieces are going to be lurking on the king side, while black still has some development to do on the other side of the board. And actually Nepo senses the danger and plays an exquisite move that sort of pulls it all together for Nepo. Goes for bishop b7, which is probably a better idea than going for f5, which is a computer suggestion. Why is f5 not so good? Well, in case of f5, white can go a takes b5, bishop b7, and if you take, then there would be compensation and good development coming back for Nepo. However, there is such a move as knight e1, takes cb, d5, and even though white is giving another pawn in this case, white is either going to go rook d1 with a huge attack or e6 straight up with big compensation for Carlsen, which obviously he'd be happy to go for. So for that reason, Nepo plays bishop b7, which is very good, being quick on his toes to get his pieces out. He takes f6, and bishop f6 is again quite a nice move, controlling the e5 square. Knight e4, and in fact I think bishop e3 would have been an interesting option, and after knight a6 just sacrificing the pawn. And if you capture, even then I can go bishop e4, and with my bishops lording down the board, white is doing fine. And if black tries to break out with c5, I just captures ab, and even if white wouldn't be winning these pawns, which he will win, this would be considered minimum compensation, but most probably just better for white, because the e6 pawn is weak and this king is sort of out in the open. Of course, knight b4, there's bishop c5. Now, instead of bishop e3, knight e4, or bishop e3, knight e5, Carlsen played knight e4 immediately, with potential threats of taking that bishop or even knight c5, basically mummifying that bishop on b7. Knight a6, knight e5, very aggressive play by Magnus, but Nepo actually reacts correctly, takes knight c5. And this is the moment where it might go very much south for Carlsen, but he is aware. Now, if he's not doing enough, the knight might just return, and black actually is overtaking the advantage once white is losing the g2 bishop due to this trade. Black is going to be in the driver's seat. So realizing that the drama is afoot, he goes knight d6, go for the sacrifice, knight b3, and to much of my surprise, he doesn't go for bishop e3, but for rook b1. And in fact, bishop e3 would give plenty counterplay, because it gives these bishops and these bishops some power. The knight isn't as stable anymore, and even if you go a6, white can go bishop e4 and launch an attack on a somewhat unleashed part of the position, like white is still on the side trying to undermine the situation, where white does have big compensation. And if you take on e5, there is captures bishop d4, and the bishop pair combined with threats on that king on g8 gives good play for Carlsen. Now he went for rook b1, which was somewhat inaccurate, takes, but he still has some counterplay. Rook d1, bishop a8, a very sensible human move, trying to move the bishop away, so there's no knight b7. If you'd go c5 now, there's knight b7 and you're losing. You don't have time to capture it because your queen is under attack. And after bishop a8, bishop e4 is happening. So now black wants to go for that c5 break. And what I was thinking about is more of the idea of b takes a4, but possibly this was rejected to this move of queen h5. If you go g6, of course, if you go h6, we go full Metallica style with queen g6, swirling on in and just winning. But after g6, black is going to face bishop takes g6, captures. If queen g7, there's takes here, rook d4, and rook h4 is incoming. And if you go here, then there's rook d4 again, queen h7, seemingly stopping this idea, but actually it does not, because rook g8 does not win the queen due to knight f7 checkmate. There is no way out. So for that very reason, Nepo plays c3, which is an interesting idea. He could have also gone g6, which probably would have been a bit more circumspect and solid, but Nepo wants to go and open up this bishop as quickly as possible. Now what's the point of c3? Well, if Carlsen would have taken takes here, g6, capture, here, queen g7 takes here, rook d4 would fail. Remember, there was a pawn on b2, so it was impossible to go rook b1 check, but in this case, this is an option, and after c5, you are losing the game as white, because the bishop is in time to save the black monarch in the corner. So of course, white decides to go queen c2, doesn't want to get into that one. B takes, ba takes, rook d8. And rook d8 is not a best move, I think, I believe queen g7 might be a bit better trying to press on the e-pawn. But Nepomniachtchi is set on to play c5. Rook a1, c5, trading more pieces, which is a good technique to have when you have an extra exchange. c4, takes, knight takes e4, king h8, just circumventing any of those tricks. Knight d6, rook b6, takes, just preparing rook b8. King g2, and big credit for Nepo for finding a6, just not allowing any rook a7 ideas. The original plan for black is to go rook b1, but of course it's no longer a check because of king g2, and there's rook a7. So that's why he goes a6 here, so any of these rook moves will be possible. King h3, hiding the king, rook c6, queen d4. Possibly queen e3 would be an option just to get closer to the king, but Carlsen wants to centralize, and also he is down to his 5th minute versus roughly 15 for Nepomniachtchi. King g8, c4, queen c7, and here white could still try to muddy waters, but Carlsen decides it's time to bail, goes for queen g4, but this allows Nepomniachtchi to get into this endgame, which is considered very close to a draw, but after c5 it's almost guaranteed. So queen takes c5, queen e6, king g7 takes, rook f8, forcing the queens off the board, where we're gonna get a 3 versus 2, which is considered to be even. It happens, queen f5, rook a7, king g8, and regardless of the king placement, even though it's not ideal, you usually want the king to be on the 6th and not on the 8th cut off, but the position is a theoretical drawn one, so it doesn't really matter. Rook b5, a very good move, just patrolling the 5th rank, not letting Carlsen to pass. Rook a5, just marking time, and now over defending the 7th. h4, h5, hoping to create this scenario with the g and f pawns, and there would be some chances for white to win. So this is actually not at all disrespectful by Carlsen to continue playing on. He has some winning chances. King h6 is very good, kind of enticing Carlsen to capture, but of course he doesn't. Rook a1, trying to probe behind and trying to win the g pawn. g4, check, and he actually does take. g5, check, and it's time for side attacks. And if the king would decide to go the other way around, like here, rook f3, rook f6, there's h6, and the position is just drawn. Of course, you can't capture that way because I take your rook. And if you take this way, this is a well-known theoretical drawn position, and white isn't going to win this. So because of that, there was a draw agreed at this position with the repetition of this check and back. So thank you so much for watching, and if you have any questions, thoughts about it, do post it below. I'd be happy to answer you, and hope you will be back. I do some streams. I actually streamed a bit on this topic, so if you're interested how and what thoughts I had live, you can check it out on our channel. And apart from that, I hope you'll have a fun time checking out the upcoming reviews as well. Thank you so much, and see you guys next time.